voice in your head that tells you you're not ready, not qualified, not enough? We all have one. Some days it whispers so quietly we can brush it off. Other days it shouts so loud it drowns out possibility. And the tricky part, it often sounds like it's trying to protect us, keeping us from risks, embarrassment, or failure, when in reality, it's holding us hostage. Welcome back, listeners, to this episode of BizBlend. I am your host, Sana. As always, and for this episode today, we are going to dive deep into the world of inner critics, how they shape our decisions, limit our careers, and sometimes even drive us harder than any external boss could. And listeners, my guest has spent over 25 years in corporate powerhouses like Unilever, Kimberly-Clark, and Absolut Vodka, mastering brand strategy while quietly battling her own inner critic. And now she helps ambitious professionals rewrite their inner narratives, heal the wounds, fueling self doubt, and unlock breakthroughs they didn't even know were possible. So, listeners, this conversation isn't just about silencing or, kind of suppressing your inner critic. It's about understanding it, challenging it, and maybe even making it work for you. Yeah. So, listeners, meet my incredible guest, Tosca DiMatteo. So, Tosca, welcome to the show. And I'm really, really honored to have you here with us.
Oh, thank you so much, Sana. I am so happy to be here. And what a beautiful introduction. Thank you so much.
Tosca, inner critic, I mean, often this has been a very kind of hot discussion around the difference between our inner voice and our inner critic. Sometimes it's our inner critic which kind of wins, when it competes with our inner voice. So, talking about your journey, Tosca, you have worked with people at the top of their game who still feel not good enough. So, where do you think our inner critics they really come from? I mean, are they built from childhood experiences or any generational experiences, or do they develop in response to our professional pressures?
That's a great question. And I think that they often come from childhood experiences, but they can also come from different parts of our life that were profound or made an impact. It can come from very small conversations and interactions that just got embedded into us.
Hmm.
And they can strengthen and develop over time just from the repeated messages from society and from those around us. But I think the deepest inner critic voice within us often starts earlier than we think.
Hmm. That is surprising because, if we can trace that voice back to its origin, Tosca, does that make it easier to dismantle, or does understanding the source not necessarily change its power over us?
That's a great question, and I believe that you don't need to know the origin.
Oh,
I
okay.
think that sometimes understanding where it comes from or finding some clues as to where and how it developed can be helpful, but the most important thing is really deciding how you want your relationship to be with that inner critic and how you want to talk to yourself moving forward and
Mm.
create new narratives. So I don't want anybody who's listening to think that I have to figure out where it came from. Sometimes we can't. And we can still do the healing and we can still find a pathway forward to shifting our relationship with that voice regardless.
Hmm. Interesting. That is interesting. I was under the impression that we definitely need to know the root cause here. But that is really a positive, fact actually, observation actually, that we don't know the root cause of it, but it's more towards the way forward, kind of trying to understand that if we listen to it, what is the cost involved here and how we can embrace it or navigate through it. And when we um, when we discuss about inner critic from the perspective of founders or leaders. Um, Imposter syndrome, or our inner critic kind of dictating our career moves. In your experience, Tosca, what's the hidden cost here?
There's so many hidden costs to actually taking action based on what your inner critic is saying, or inaction for that matter. The costs range from not feeling fulfilled because you're not actually doing the thing that's in your heart that you want to do or
Mm.
say. The cost can also come physically in terms of how we're letting thoughts and narratives that don't serve us get into our body and get trapped there.
Mm.
And that's my belief anyway. And I think that, there are the costs of the relationships that we have and
Mhm.
how we end up showing up because our inner critic is taking control. These are just some of the costs. And I think that, as it relates to, the entrepreneurial journey and taking risks and getting to that next level of growth, whether personally
Mhm.
or professionally, that's often when our inner critic can get the loudest. And I think it's worth saying that it can actually be a great sign. If your inner critics are getting
Okay.
really loud, it's a great
Mm.
sign that you're on the path to that next chapter, on that path to, if you choose it, to getting to
Mhm.
that next level because you're willing to do it anyway.
Well, that definitely flips the narrative. Definitely flips the narrative, and um, uh, it's a bit of a personal question, Tosca. Has it ever happened with you when your inner critic kind of dictated your decisions, or your career moves, because you have worked with some major companies out there, major brands out there?
Oh my gosh, of course. Of course, I do this work because I've deeply been steeped into it. Basically, my whole life. I really don't know my life without inner critics. And I say that because I was born looking different. I was born with a visible birth defect called cleft lip and palate. So,
Oh, okay.
from the time that I was a child, I looked different in every room that I walked into, and I know there's a lot of people that can relate to this kind of idea of feeling
Mhm.
less than, of, feeling like I don't matter or feeling like I don't
Mhm.
belong. And
Yep.
so, yes, I've had to absolutely address how I speak to myself over and over and over again, and the work only deepens, because I think what also can happen is at different times in my life, I had different inner critics that were taking front and center stage. I clearly have one that's about my appearance, and that one
Mhm.
can get triggered from time to time. I have one around food and what I'm eating, and that comes from a
Oh.
a lot of things around, growing up in, shame around food, but also at the age of 22, I was
Mhm.
diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and
Oh, okay.
that made a huge impact about how I was telling myself what I should and shouldn't do and should and shouldn't eat and all of that stuff. And then as an entrepreneur, right? The inner critic
Mhm.
says, "Who do you think you are?" So,
Okay. Okay.
yeah, and I think every time we step into the work, it's about understanding what we need now and how do we continue to heal those wounds and become our own best friend in the process.
Wow. That is really inspiring, Tosca. That's really inspiring. Um, and I'll just bring a bit of a different perspective here, because of course, um, these discussions, they're not black and white. So I've heard that inner critic, it keeps us sharp. We often talk about achieving perfection, flawless. whether it's any pitch meeting or client presentations or um, important crucial meetings or any crucial business decisions. So our inner critic, it kind of stops us from getting lazy or overconfident. Do you think that there's ever a case for keeping it around as a motivator?
I actually don't believe there's ever a case for keeping it around. And I think there's a difference between the kind of excitement and stress that kind of pushes you and moves you. Um, and there's a difference between that and a voice telling you, "You better work harder,"
Yeah.
because who you are is not enough, right? And it may not come out in those
Mm.
exact words, right? But I
Yeah.
think that what happens is we're so accustomed to the whip, approach. If I just beat myself up enough, I'll go do better. And what I encourage with my clients is to experiment with a loving approach to yourself and how much further that can take you than
Mhm.
actually letting your inner critic stay around because you think that it's actually serving you, because without it, how would you have the motivation or how would you stay sharp, or and all of those things. So I hey, to your earlier point, right? There's a lot of different
Mhm.
opinions and everybody's experience is different. And what I'm inviting is for folks that are listening to say, what else is possible to serve as a motivator and to serve as a voice that actually lifts me up like my own best friend would
Mm.
lift me up? And how
Uh,
different could that experience be?
yeah, I think that's a very, very important reflection, rather introspection. That's super critical. Because for some people, that edge is what keeps them producing at a high level. But then there's a caveat: it can come at a huge, huge personal cost. Because I have seen some of my friends, especially who are in the entrepreneurial circle, suffering through it. So I can absolutely, I definitely agree with you on this. Um, and Tosca, you work with people's personal, helping people's build personal and professional brands, and you stress on uncovering new narratives. So how does rewriting or kind of recreating that story actually shift the day-to-day decisions? I mean, if you can give a success story or a case study, that will really, really, help us to understand this.
Yeah, we often, there's some data point out there, right? Which like 95% of the thoughts we had today were the thoughts we had yesterday, right?
Okay.
And the
Yeah.
way that we tell the stories about ourselves often don't change because
Mhm.
we've just been telling them for years and years and sometimes decades and decades. And then we realize that, like, oh, but we've changed. And oh, now with the perspective of my experience, I can actually
Mhm.
tell a different story that's based on where I'm going, actually, and not where I've been. So,
Mhm.
um, I have a beautiful client of mine, and this narrative that she's been telling herself for years, and she's an entrepreneur and has,
Mhm.
incredible work that she's done in the world. And she tells herself a story about how she's a waitress, that
Mhm.
she's taking orders from her clients
Okay.
and, you know, that she works for pennies because there's been a whole lot of work to do around her own self-worth, right? And her own
Yeah.
and seeing herself differently now as somebody who's actually successfully run a business for 20 years. But her mind is telling her stories like she's, 6 months into the journey and has, you know, no stories to tell about how awesome her work is and what she's able to do with her clients.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
we've worked big time on shifting her narrative from being the waitress to being the CEO. And
Mm.
what does that mean to her? How would she show up if she showed up as a CEO and not a waitress? Because even though she may never ever, tell a client or even come
Mhm.
off to a client that she's kind of in this waitress role, she's telling it to herself over and over again. And that shows up in all kinds of ways that are not serving her and certainly not serving her clients. So it's made a huge difference in the kind of folks that she's attracted to her business
Yeah. Yeah.
because she's stepped into, well, I'm a CEO. And how do I want to be as a CEO? How do I want to talk to myself? How do I want to make decisions? And how do I want to invite potential clients into this work? And it's been game changing for her. When we first started, she was struggling to find new clients. She was in a drought. And then she got to the point where she had to hire additional help and actually put people on a waiting list in order to be able to accommodate, yeah, the inquiries coming in and the new clients. So it was a huge game changer for her.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. That is really a huge transformation, and I can actually sense the shift in energy. That energy that you'll exude, or uh, that courage, that strength, with a bit of vulnerability. Because when you come from that transformation, you know what are your highs and what are your lows, and that kind of keeps you grounded. But at the same time, it also gives you that sense of, this is my company. This is something this is my vision. So, instead of having that feeling that, this is out of my control, it's kind of feeding me, I'm not feeding it. I think that it's such a pivotal shift in the energy.
Oh my gosh, yes, I love that you pick up on that and honor, yeah, like that the energy shift is everything. It's kind of like if we just take it to a very simple concept, because I think sometimes when people hearing this, it might be hard to believe, well, how really? Really that shift was possible? Look, and this client, let's call her Janice. Like Janice was like in the muckety muck of the arena of doing the work,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
she
yeah.
welcomed it, and she took every opportunity to look and say, "Oh, what am I doing to myself?" Or, "Oh, dang, I showed up as a waitress again," and we would just
Mm,
keep going at it and keep going at it. But, to take it simply, it's this idea of you might be in resentment, you might be really upset, right? And you send an email to somebody who you're actually, right, kind of in a kind of a negative space with. But you send that
mhm,
email and it's got all the right things, right? You're being nice and you're saying all these nice things,
mhm,
but energetically, right? You're
mhm.
pissed off.
Yeah.
And somehow that person is like, "Is everything okay?" And you're just like, "Wait, what?" Like, I didn't even say anything. It's because you don't have to say anything because your energy speaks
Exactly.
for itself. I don't You're laughing, like, can you relate to this, like, this
I
example?
can. I can, Tosca.
Yeah.
For me, as well as for many of my acquaintances, I have seen that shift. I've seen that shift. I mean, not a very, very obvious, but with time, with experiences, over years, I've seen that, how it reflects in the way you communicate, and that, okay, I'm at the right place. I have that agency. I have that sovereignty. It's just, um, I was not energetically aligned, but now I'm in the right place. So, people get to understand that.
Yes, and that work, you know, involves, like, this not just the story that we're telling ourselves about ourselves, but this
Mm,
inner critic piece is also about the stories that we're making up in our mind to fill a narrative that we don't understand. And that narrative can be about other people, which can include judgment, right? Which
true.
which can be I'm sorry, what?
No, true. I was saying this true.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and it could be the worst version, right, of
Yeah.
what was possible versus the best possible version of that story, right? I could say, oh, this person totally blew me off. And, now I'm emailing and I'm kind of pissed, but I'm acting like I'm not, you know. But if you stop and say, well, what is the story I'm telling myself? You can then decide, you know what? I actually don't know if that's true. So
Mhm.
what other stories could be true? Or what do I know for a fact is true? And then how do I actually let that be my come from place?
Mm, definitely, definitely. Ah, that's golden, golden. Tosca, so if our listeners, they would like to connect with you further and explore more about, I should say, tackling the inner critic and rewriting our narratives, what would be the best way?
Yeah, yeah, if you wanna fall in love with your inner critic, that's what I like to say because it's a part of
Okay.
ourselves we get to love versus hate because it actually does love us, it just doesn't know how to do it. But, I would say sign up for my newsletter, go to toscadimatteo.com/newsletter, and that will help open up the arena of things that I do. I'm on Instagram with my full name. I'm on LinkedIn. I have my website, toscadimatteo.com. And yeah, those are the ways I would suggest to kind of get connected with practical tips and inspiration for how to get out of your own way of success.
Of course, of course. I really love that you mentioned about loving our inner critic, like falling in love with our inner critic. So I'll definitely make sure to have all the links in the show notes for our listeners. And Tosca, thank you. Thank you so much for bringing this up, for reminding us that um, the real breakthroughs, they don't come from silencing that voice, definitely comes from hearing it, falling in love with it, understanding it, and then deciding to write the next chapter of our stories, our journeys ourselves. So thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, Sana, thank you. What a beautiful set of questions and reflections that you shared. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about this topic that I think really does change lives.
Definitely, definitely. And to all the listeners out there, you know what? The inner critic isn't just a voice, it is a narrator shaping the story we tell ourselves about what's possible. And while we may never be able to mute it entirely, we can choose whether it gets the final say. That's empowering, right, listeners? So, if you have been waiting for the permission to dream bigger, take the leap, get out of your comfort zone, or step into the next version of yourself, this is it. The inner critic may have had the opening lines, but you get to write the ending. With that, I conclude this episode of this Blend podcast. Until then, this is your host, Sana, signing off. Thank you.